Here is my first point for you, and I'd like to share with you some of my own personal experience. As we all know nowadays, there is bad plastic, and we're all trying to do, in whatever country we are, find ways of being able to eliminate the bad plastic. But I'd also like to suggest to you there's also good plastic. And the best plastic is the plasticity of our brain. And I just like to share with you something from my own experience to be able to prove that an old, graying, a calcified brain such as mine is still plastic. About 2 years ago, I became aware of the fact that I was very, very bad at anagrams. It came about basically through my marriage to my wife, who was married. All of my in-laws are mad Scrabble fanatics. And I was appalling at anagrams, and all of my wife's family simply used it as further evidence of the fact that I was the wrong choice for her to choose as a husband. After many years, though, I discovered that I could actually improve that. So for the last 2 years, every time I've seen one of those little anagram exercises, maybe even Wordle, if you're aware of that, I have tried to see if I can work that out. And I've noticed after about 18 months, there is no group of letters now that I can't look at and be able to devise what the word is. And so I'm just using that as an example of how plastic our brains are. And if we continue to work them, then we can develop these skills. And the skill that we're talking about this morning or today is obviously our improvisational skill. And I'd like to challenge us, those of us who are Toastmasters or aspiring Toastmasters, to ask you, how do you think we can improve the improvisational opportunities in every meeting? If it's a skill that we can develop, and if in Toastmasters we are creating an environment where people can develop their skills, then what are we doing to help them to develop that plasticity, to develop that improvisational skill, which will give us more confidence in every kind of speaking that we are doing? So I'd like to open this up to the chat room. If any of you from Toastmasters or even from your own creative thinking can suggest ways that your club may in the future be able to give your members more improvisational speaking opportunities, what would you suggest? We have the table topic sessions in our meetings, but I'd like to challenge us and suggest that maybe they're not as improvisational as they might be. So at the warm-up in the table topics, thank you. Here's a couple of suggestions that I'd like to throw into the room. At our club, we have an addiction to fortunately, unfortunately. Some of you may be aware of it. It is simply a round robin exercise where you go around the room with a narrative that is started by somebody, and then each person alternates with taking it in a different direction with fortunately, unfortunately. It's simply an improvisational speaking game taken from speech and drama exercises, also sometimes used in theatre sports. So I'd like to encourage those clubs that don't already start with fortunately, unfortunately, to give that as a suggestion. But for our club, I'd like to suggest that maybe we're not using it as improvisationally as we possibly could. So here are some of my ideas. I'd like at our next club meeting, and for others, for us to introduce random fortunately, unfortunately. We tend to do fortunately, unfortunately around the room. And so people know in the next three speakers, after that, it will be me. I would like to suggest that we do it totally randomly around the room, so nobody knows who is going to be speaking next. You are all forced to continually be thinking. I have noticed with Toastmasters where the traditional format is to mention the topic, where you have hopefully every member in the room and attending thinking about how they might answer that topic, and then throw in the person's name So it's totally improvisational. But I've noticed in a lot of clubs, we've started to fall away from that a little bit. Maybe giving the person's name before we mention the topic, which is not truly improvisational. So think about a random, fortunately, unfortunately. Think about a round robin, and that's the round robin where you finish on one word, then the conductor of the session bangs the gavel, nominates that word, and then the next person has to start with the word that is finished by the previous speaker. To me, this is truly improvisational because it is forcing you to come up with an idea on the spot. We have introduced interviews into our club meeting, and thank you, Rebecca, for being the first to launch that new format in our club. I would like to suggest we can do more interviews, and the interviews should be done with the interviewee not knowing what the questions are. So it becomes a genuinely improvisational activity, and maybe even the interviewer only has their first starting question and is forced to use their improvisational skills to think about the next question that they might ask. What about tag team debating, where we have each person speak for 1 minute and we introduce a debating topic, and then after you've spoken for 1 minute, you simply tag somebody else in the room, and their job is either to continue on your argument or to take up the opposing argument to be able to give arguments against your particular point. And for those of you who have not heard of it, Pecha Kucha, and I'd like to suggest Pecha Kucha Surprise. Now, Pecha Kucha is an activity, and there are Pecha Kucha meetings around the world. It started in Japan and was based on the fact that most people give really, really boring presentations when PowerPoint is involved. Pecha Kucha is based on 20 slides, and you speak for 20 seconds to each slide. And you have your prepared presentation, but it forces you to move quickly, not to dwell on one particular issue. I'd like to suggest we can use Pecha Kucha model as a way of being able to improve our improvisational skills. And I'm going to ask if there's a volunteer in the room who would like to try my Pecha Kucha Surprise table topic. Somebody put your hand. Okay, sorry, I can't see your name there. Please unmute yourself. Hello?
Hi.
Hi. I can't see your name there. Who's?
Lorraine Walker.
Oh, Lorraine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I've also mentioned in the chat box too a Houston debate, which I can talk about later.
I'm very glad to hear about that. So, Lorraine, are you willing to participate in my 2-minute Pecha Kucha table topic?
Yep. I'm not sure how I'll go at 7 o'clock in the morning, but anyway.
Oh, this is the test, and thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 6 images, and I'm going to change the image every 20 seconds. Okay. So you will have 120 seconds worth of images.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to speak for 20 seconds. Well, as long as you don't need to worry about that, because I'll be changing the image every 20 seconds, which will cause you to change direction of the topic that you're actually speaking on.
Okay.
You ready, Lorraine?
I'm ready.
Okay, everyone get Lorraine up on your screen. Maybe hit view and hit speaker view so you can get the full appreciation. Sorry, Lorraine, you're in a tiny image on here, which is why I didn't recognize you, and I'm very embarrassed at that.
No, Kevin,
we're ready to go.
Oh, yeah.
Here's Lorraine. Here is your, there are numbers on the slide, so you'll know how we're going. So okay. Here's the first one. You'll start speaking as soon as that slide appears.
I was in a game last night where we had to throw six rolls of dice at 6 each point. And I tell you what, I was pretty bad at that. I could not get a 6 to save my life. But anyway, I had a go. I got 5s and 2s and 1s and 3s. Could not get a 6. So we didn't win that game. And I never, ever go to the casino because I am absolutely useless at gambling. If I went there, I'd have to be paying the casino almost my entire wages because I just can never pick a winner. I can hardly even pick an argument, let alone Oh, my daughter-in-law has been watching the Tour de France recently, but what she's really watching the Tour de France for is to get the recipes from the French chef at the end of the session. And she sits up till all hours of the morning just to watch these cyclists who are belting around the streets of France just so she can get a recipe. She didn't realize I've got my fingers crossed because today I'm travelling in peak hour traffic. I'm retired. I hate peak hour traffic. I am driving to the other side of Brisbane. So I've got my fingers crossed, man, that I'm going to find the easy traffic, that I'm going to find green lights all the way, that I'm going to get to my destination in time. Oh, he's an Apple user. Marvelous man. This man is obviously a man of quality and understanding and appreciation of good equipment because he is using an Apple computer. And I personally have been hooked on Apple ever since we first were introduced to computers. And I find Microsoft very confusing. Yeah, that's me. Turn left wherever. And it took me a long time to learn the difference between my right and my left. And I used this when I was teaching my kids which way to left, to use my left hand to make the L on my forehead. But he obviously looks like he's a learner. So I think I'm a bit past the learning stage of differentiating.
Time's up. Big round of applause for Lorraine.
I need a cup of coffee.
How was that, Lorraine?
That was good. That was good.
Yeah, mate.
Yeah.
Oh,
So some ideas there maybe, and it's really easy. Just find
Yeah.
6 random
Yep.
images, throw them together, and give it to your
yeah, it's
table topics participants.
yeah. Sending my notice.
How do you spell Pechacucha?
I'll go back to the slide with it on.
Setting up a space.
It's on the chat, Lorraine.
Pechakucha.
Yeah.
Pechakucha.
Um,
Any other comments about that? Just very quickly.
I thought Lorraine did remarkably well. She was really, really spot on. Well done, Lorraine.
Yeah, Lorraine, you did really well as a, what would you call it, improvisation. I think that's a great idea, Kevin. We need to give that a go, mate.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Lorraine, you had the Houston debate as a suggestion you were going to throw
Yes.
into the room.
Houston debate is where you have, it's very easy in a room that's set up in a U shape like you have here. You just, the topics master comes up with a very controversial topic like men are better than women or something like that, you know. And one side of just divide the room exactly in half as you can see it from the lectern, and one side debates that yes, men are better than women, the other side debates that no, they're not. And the more controversial the topic, the funnier the debate. And you give people 20 seconds each.
I think that's a great principle. It's a great idea, but it's also a great principle that you mentioned, and we found that with fortunately, unfortunately as well, that the more bizarre the story is, the more ridiculous the contributions that people make are, the more that people have fun with it, and actually the more creative it becomes. So
I have to confess I stole that idea from Marilyn Freeman. So.
I'm sure Marilyn would be delighted at you stealing that idea, and thank you for giving her credit for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we need to do is build our improvisational confidence. And I would suggest the best way we can build our improvisational confidence is learning how to start without knowing how you'll finish. This is very different to table topics contests. Here's what I was told by a very experienced Toastmaster when I was thinking about going into a table topics contest. They said the judges or the timekeepers won't start the timing until you've actually made your first communication with the audience. So don't start speaking straight away. Listen to the topic, take a few seconds, maybe plan it out in your mind. And if you can think of an end point and work towards that, then judges love that. And they tend to get more points for that. Now, that's a very valid approach for a table topics contest. I would like to suggest something that's a little bit more challenging if we're going to increase our improvisational confidence. We need to give ourselves resistance training. We need to give ourselves the sort of work that makes us try harder, so that when we're in a situation where we are trying to show ourselves of our best, then we can improve. This will help us in your table topics. It will help you in table topics contests, because it will improve your improvisational confidence, but it will also improve your prepared speaking. I believe it is impossible to become a more confident impromptu speaker without becoming a more confident prepared speaker. It simply enhances our overall speaking confidence. And the one way we can face the table topics opportunities that we have in Toastmasters with more confidence, I would suggest, is by using the principle of memory hooks. If we could have memory hooks in our mind, so we have formats in our mind that we know work, then we can be more prepared to start a table topic or start speaking on a subject without knowing how we're going to finish. And I would like us all to be able to develop that skill of starting speaking on a topic, not knowing when you're going to finish, and then building your confidence when you find out that you actually do end up somewhere productive. There are two formulae that I learned from Toastmasters from 30 years ago, and I think they're still as valid as ever. You all know about past, present, and future. And what I found is, whilst these formulae are useful, they can be more helpful to speakers if you give people prompt phrases. Simply give them the first two words that they say. I can remember when my English teacher, back in, I think, my first year of secondary school, and I was struggling, writing an essay assignment. And they simply said, the hardest word in your essay is going to be the first word. Write down it. Because they said, once you've written down it, you've written the first word, you've challenged and got over the first hurdle, it'll be easier from that point forward. And I believe it's the same with our table topics formulae. So past, present, and future, start with in the past, and then lead on to today, and then move on to in the future. And of course, there's the old favorite called PREP. Point, reason, example, point. And the number of times I've used this, not only in my own life, but also in my professional training, has been almost impossible to count. And again, let's think about prompt phrases. And with PREP, I have been able to glean some prompt phrases that I've either come up with myself or been able to develop from very clever people I've copied stuff from. And here are the prompt phrases that I suggest for PREP. First of all, start out with an I statement. I heard this wonderful phrase recently: if you start out with an I statement, you will present yourself to the audience as a courageous and generous speaker. And the principle of reciprocity says that if you present yourself as a generous speaker to an audience, then the audience will feel a natural urge to be generous with their attention. So starting with an I statement, simply a strong statement, I think, I feel, or I believe, is a brilliant way to be able to lead yourself into that topic. This is because, and the world's leader in influence and study on persuasion, Professor Robert Cialdini, Emeritus Professor Robert Cialdini from the University of Arizona, says that because is one of the most persuasive words in the English language, because of entrainment that's happened to us as children. And so the reason gives us the way to be able to feed that neocortex, the logical part of the brain, with the reason that backs up our opening statement. We then go into an example, why only recently, which has us producing the images and the emotions that feed the limbic brain, the part of the brain responsible for all decision making. And by starting out with a phrase like only recently, it allows us to be able to add immediacy, which again gets people's attention nowadays. And then finishing with, so that's why I said, where you repeat your opening statement creates that internal linkage. There are only two things we can work with in an audience member's brain: their imagination and their linkages. Linkages with past experience, and also the internal linkages that we as speakers create, that creates that fluency, which makes what we say more sticky and more likely to be remembered. America's holistic plastic surgeon says you can look 5 years younger in just 2 minutes a day. I tried that. The trouble is you have to do it for 2 minutes a day for 5 years. So by the time you've done it, you're back to where you started. However, I'd like to suggest that as Toastmasters, we can improve our improvisational skills in just 2 minutes a day. If you could spend just 2 minutes a day on something which is going to improve your confidence whenever you are speaking in front of an audience, I would suggest that would be a good investment in your time. Here's how you can do that using the technology that's available to us nowadays. First of all, there's one of my favorites called Speech Ace. Speech Ace is a site where you can go to and practice improvisational speaking. And it gives you different topics. I've just done a screenshot of a few there. A speaking test for fun, a speaking test for books, a speaking test for doing a job interview. So Speech Ace in the free version will allow you to be able to do that. And you've also all heard, I hope, of Toastmasters and their liaison with Udly. And Udly gives you ways in which you can practice table topics. You can set your time. You can practice table topics. It will generate topics for you. Or you can do speaking games like storyteller or spin a yarn or speaking without using fillers. And it will not only give you a chance to be able to practice that impromptu speech, it will give you analytics on how well you delivered your speech, even to the point, if you're speaking to a camera, of how good your eye contact was and how well you centered your image on the actual visual image, but it'll also obviously give you lots of feedback on your vocal delivery, your pauses. It will even nominate the times when you smiled in your presentation. Use this as a way of practicing. Now, in America, there is the National Speakers Association. In Australia, it's called the PSA, the Professional Speakers Association. This is the organization for those speakers who want to go out and earn money on the professional speaking stage. Just a little insight for those Australians. Professional Speaking Australia only 2 weeks ago made a decision at board level that previously the only way that people could join is if they were able to prove significant earnings already as a speaker. They have now introduced what's called affiliate membership. So any speakers who are interested in looking at that particular path, membership at affiliate level is available with Professional Speakers Australia. You're able to attend their meetings and have access to most of their events. The main reason that I mentioned this, though, is NSA in the United States is the association of around 2,000 professional speakers in the USA. And about 5 years ago, they did research on audiences to identify what are the 3 main things that audiences crave from a speaker. And to be honest, these 3 surprised me and surprised many other people who saw it, but we've taken a lot of learning from that. And I'd like to share that with you. So the 3 things that the National Speakers Association in their survey found that audiences crave from a speaker are, first of all, authenticity. They want you to be real. They don't want it to be a show. They also want you to be vulnerable. They don't expect you to be perfect. They expect you to be generous enough to be able to talk about your failings and maybe what you learned from that. And whilst an audience also expects you to be well prepared, they expect spontaneity. They want you to be in the moment. They want you to be live there. They don't want you to just be reciting something that maybe you have prepared and learned earlier on. And certainly I've noticed the value of spontaneity in my own speaking. Many of you would have perhaps emceed events or at the very least been Toastmaster of a meeting. And here's what you probably have found, because I've found this. With audience reactions to when I'm trying to introduce humor, I get a certain reaction to the prepared humor, but I always get a much better reaction to any spontaneous humor. The audience automatically appreciates it. Almost to the point now, when I am preparing an event as a professional MC, I will deliberately leave myself space so as I can create spontaneous humor of observations that are going on in the room. because even though it might not be as inherently clever as the stuff that I have prepared, it will get a better reaction simply because of its immediacy and its spontaneity. I'd also like to suggest to you that there is enormous persuasive power in spontaneity. And this has impacted on the professional training that I've been doing for decades now. Here's my theory about how people perceive speakers, and I'd like to align it with an analogy with a newspaper. Remember newspapers? Those things that they printed in black and white, sometimes in color. Sometimes people even used to get them delivered to their home. And I would suggest that when you're reading a newspaper, the editorial, maybe depending on the newspaper, is read with fairly low cynicism, and the advertising is read with high cynicism, because it is designed to obviously manipulate you in some particular way to generate some behavior which is going to be of benefit to that advertiser. And so the ad is read with low credibility, the editorial is read with higher credibility. And I would suggest there is an alignment there with how we do our presentations and also how we address any questions from the audience. I would suggest our prepared content tends to get treated with a degree of cynicism, because people know this is what we've prepared. They know that we are trying to convince them with a particular agenda. But I would suggest that our spontaneous content is treated with much higher credibility. And so here is the theory that I've developed, that when we have a presentation, we have a question and answer session at the end. And I had to adjust that graphic when I put it together because I wanted to be accurate. Anytime that I am talking to people about a question and answer session, there is one basic principle: you never finish on a question and answer session. The last 30 seconds, the last 45 seconds, at the most the last minute, always has to be yours. The question and answer session is too fractious. The principle of recency says that the most likely thing they will remember is the last thing that they hear. You don't want the last thing that they hear, you trying to come up with a reasonable answer to a stupid question from somebody who wasn't listening properly. So I will always introduce a question and answer session with saying, before I make my final comments, I now have time for questions. So I will respond to the questions, but I will let them know that the final statement is going to be made by me, because that is too important to leave that to a question and answer session. But here's how I've changed that now. I'm now looking for the question and answer session to be longer. I put more effort with my trainees into training them on how to answer the questions than I do on the actual preparation of the presentation, because I realized that their responses to the questions have a much higher credibility than the prepared material. So we work on the principle of prepared spontaneity. Here is the principle. You don't just tell them. You put questions in their minds for which you already have great answers. So you use the principle of spontaneity by generating questions. You see, if I say something to an audience, some of them might hear it, some of them might be impressed with my language skills and with my delivery skills. But the mind cannot resist an unanswered question. When somebody asks you a question as a speaker, a little door opens up in their mind, waiting for the answer to your question. And this is how you are able to get your content to have much more retention, by putting it in the format of an answer to a question that you have generated into the audience. Pam, you had a question there.
I do have a question, Kevin. Can you give us an example of how you'd sort of plant something or seed something in your speech that then prompts a question from the audience?
Thank you, Pamela. So, for example, I might be talking about a particular project that we've done, and I want to explain to you how this project is progressing. A lot of the presentations that I have to work with my trainees is them presenting maybe to a board about where their project is, or maybe to a group to be able to get approval for a particular project. And I throw in there, we've achieved a lot of things with this. Along the way, there have been some surprises, but we've been able to achieve most of the goals that we aim for. Then I noticed somewhere along the line, someone's going to say, what were the surprises that you got? Because that's generated a question. We've received some great support, even from some people we didn't expect. And then I'll continue on, because I know that people will not be able to resist asking me, who were those people? And then I can introduce that. Does that answer that question?
Excellent. That's great. Very good example, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, throw those in there. Generate the questions that will give you, and if they don't ask the question, you can throw it in anyhow. But if you can put it in the format of an answer to a question, it is going to have higher credibility and much more likely to be retained. So here's the principle. Most questions from the audience are predictable. If they are predictable, you can prepare for them. Quick story from my own experience about 5 years ago. I did a lot of work with the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore. This is the organisation responsible for running Changi Airport, Singapore Airlines, and all the ground services that support that. And what I was doing is I was training their senior managers who had 20 minutes to get in front of the board of the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore, present their project, present their area of concern, be grilled by the board in questions about that. And then at the end of their 20 minutes, they either got approval or deferral for their particular subject. And with this 2-day training session I was doing, at the end of the first day, one of the trainees came up to me and said, I'm going to be late tomorrow. I won't be able to attend until about 11 o'clock in the morning. And I said, why is that? And they said, because I had to do a presentation to the board about a very important project that we are trying to get them to approve. And so I said, well, if you're prepared to work with us, we will spend the next hour working on how you can come up with great answers to the predictable questions that they will ask. And they participated in that, maybe with a bit of cynicism. At 11 o'clock the next morning, they walked into the room with the biggest smile on their face I've ever seen. And I said, how did it go? They said, yes, they approved it. He said, but the most amazing thing was they only answered 4 questions, and there were 4 questions that we predicted exactly here in this room yesterday afternoon. And I've repeated that experience many times with other organizations. The questions are predictable. And so if the questions are predictable, why can't you go in there with already great answers prepared for those? One of my favorite quotes from the Latin senator called Seneca, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. If you're prepared, you don't always know when or where the opportunity will occur, but you will get luckier. And if you are having problems in thinking about what questions they might generate, if you don't have a group like I had that time, use ChatGPT. Here's an example of what I would do. Imagine I was trying to convince the Australian Institute of Engineers with a presentation to start up a corporate Toastmasters club. What I would ask them, here's what I'd ask ChatGPT. I'll be delivering a speech below with the aim of convincing the audience that they should start a corporate Toastmasters club. The audience are management and staff of the Brisbane branch of the Australian Institute of Engineers. Please review the speech from their perspective and suggest the 5 most likely questions. So what I'm doing is I'm feeding the entire presentation into ChatGPT. I am giving it a description of the demographic of the audience and their context, and I'm asking it to generate the 5 most typical questions. And then if I don't think they're great, I will simply say, please give me 5 more questions. Please give me 5 alternative questions. Please give me 5 questions from people who might be only starting out engineers, or people who might be younger people in the organization. I can keep adjusting that as much as I like. So if you can't think of the questions yourself, use artificial intelligence. Don't get it to write the speech for you. That's a great way to look foolish, but get it to review the speech for you and get it to predict the questions that the audience might answer. And then if you really want to, you can go back and ask ChatGPT to come up with answers to those questions for you, but you probably won't need to do that. Another area that I mentioned regarding improvisational speaking is the area of networking events. And I'm not sure if any of you have been to a networking event, and there are formal networking events. Some people even pay to go to them. That's another issue, and I'll go into that particular irritation of mine. But if you've ever been to a networking event, here's what you probably found. Networking events are where elevator speeches go to die. I have heard the most horrible, most boring, most instantly forgettable self-introductions in my entire life at networking events. And I'm thinking, for goodness sake, you have got 30 seconds to 60 seconds to impress us, to create some memorable piece of communication. And what's the best you can come up with? You know, my name is so-and-so, I come from XYZ organization and I do this. Well, how boring is that? And I have trouble even remembering what your name is by the time you finish speaking. So if you're ever going to be going to a networking event, use the principle of prepared spontaneity and come up with something interesting. Here are a couple of formulae that I think work. First one, simple one that I created called Help to Buy. Who do you help? Again, with prompt phrases. What do you help them to do? And how do you help them to do that? So, for example, if I was talking about our Toastmasters Club, we help people who are trying to develop their confidence in speaking in front of a group by providing a supportive atmosphere where they can really test their skills and be able to get feedback on how they can improve. And we do this by giving them a mentor and by giving them the program from Toastmasters that will allow them to be able to develop their skills. That was just off the top of my head, but all I'm suggesting is it allows you to be able to say something that's significant and memorable. An alternative is one called the Gaddy pitch, created by Anthony Gaddy. And that starts with, you know how sometimes people are concerned about their confidence whenever they have to stand up and speak in front of people. What we do is help people to develop that skill in a structured format called Toastmasters. In fact, only last week, we had somebody come into our meeting who had never been able to speak in front of people before. And by the end of the meeting, they were confident enough to be able to stand up and give us feedback on how they thought this particular format might help them. So, Help to Buy or the Gaddy pitch, two different ways in which you might be able to create a self-introduction that is memorable and is not forgettable. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Any time that you might be tempted to grab your phone and spend some of your valuable life going onto social media, don't. Think about what are some questions that people might ask me about the subjects that I speak about. What are some ways I might be able to introduce myself in an interesting way if somebody asks me what I do and how do I do it? Think about those. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And even though you can't predict when the opportunity will arise, when that occurs, your brain will simply be more able to generate those thoughts and those ideas. We all have those ideas there. You've all had the situation at maybe a meeting or an event when you know that the person who can come up with just the right thing to say at just the right minute takes control of that conversation, has the most impact on that narrative that's going on. The trouble is, for most of us, we come up with just the right thing to say in the car on the way home or lying in bed that night. Now, nothing has happened to put more information into your brain between when that opportunity occurred and when that great idea came to you. So that idea was already there. You simply lack the ability to dig down into your memory bank, to drag out those words, then put some words around them so as you can then articulate that at the moment when it really counted. And using that principle of luck is when preparation meets opportunity means that you can become more spontaneous, more confident in those improvisational moments. I've also done a lot of training for people in media interviews. And there is a mistake that a lot of people that I have trained have made with media interviews. Most of the people I've been training have been athletes. I did a lot of work with the Queensland Academy of Sport and the Australian Institute of Sport in training Olympic athletes, not to be able to perform any better, but to be able to speak more confidently so as they can become a better product for a potential sponsor. And here's what I discovered in talking with a lot of journalists is, unlike when they're asking politicians a question where it becomes a little bit of a game for them to come up with a tricky question and the politician to say something without actually answering that question, in interviews when they're not with politicians, the journalists don't care if you answer the question or not. They just want you to say something interesting about the topic. So don't tie yourself in knots thinking, have I answered the question? Just make sure you say something interesting about the topic. And by doing that, you can have more impact on the interview. You'll probably find the interview goes longer. And my suggestion is, again, it's easy to come up with facts and figures. What you most need is the word pictures, the stories, the examples, the quotes from other people. These are the things that feed that all-important part of the brain that I referred to a number of times, the limbic brain, the part of the brain that has no language, the part of the brain that can only process images and emotions, but most importantly is the part of the brain responsible for all decision making. So if you want to be able to influence people to decide to retain the information that you have shared with them, then make sure you use these skills. But one thing that you can do is you can be clever about reframing the question. So when they give you a question, here's a little technique you can use to reframe it to be able to give the response that you want. It's really easy. That's a really interesting question that raises a number of issues. I think the most important is, and then you simply speak about what issue you thought is the most significant. And you can use that over and over again. Thank you for that question. You've raised a number of issues there. But I think the most important one is, so being able to reframe that question, to be able to turn it into something that can help you to say what you want to at that situation. I want to have a look in the chat room now, because I haven't had a chance to look there. Any comments from anyone? I've been speaking fairly constantly now for 45 minutes, so it's time that I shut up and give others around the room. Let's see if we can tap into some of the wisdom around the room about any comments or suggestions that others might have, or how they might use some of the ideas that we've spoken about so far in this session. Anybody have any comments? So thank you, Pamela, saying you want to increase more improvisation into our meetings. President Steve, Vice President Education Adrian, I'm sure you have heard that from our very influential member, Pamela, who is speaking on behalf of all of our other club members. And so at Brisbane Sunrise Speakers Toastmasters, if you'd like to join us, remember, 6:20 for 6:30 Brisbane time in the morning, then we will be doing more with improvisational opportunities. Rob, you had a comment.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, that last one could be used, reframe the question, could be used in almost any situation when you're a bit lost for words. I think that's brilliant that I can get up and say, that's a wonderful question you asked me, Kevin. And the most interesting part about it is that I don't have anything particularly to say, but blah, blah, blah. Off you go. You've got yourself started. And I think I'd like to use that in future to take away my fear of table topics.
Thank you. And yeah, let's not fear table topics. Let's embrace table topics. Let's make sure that we are more disciplined about running the table topic session in our meetings by making sure you give the topic, give everyone a chance to think about that topic, have them all imagine how might I address that topic, and then name the person, and have everyone else in the room disappointed that they didn't get a chance to be able to talk about their thoughts. This is how we make our brain more plastic. This is how we develop those on-the-spot skills. And then by using the prompt phrases, like I mentioned in those past, present, and future, and in prep, and maybe even reframing the question like I just suggested there, all you're doing is using a couple of words to buy yourself a few seconds. Your brain doesn't need much. The fastest person in the world can speak at around 300 words per minute. Maybe I think 400 they got to at one stage. The slowest thinker in the world can think at around 600 words per minute. You can always think much faster than you can speak. And so if you can stop yourself panicking and give your brain a few extra seconds, you will be quite amazed at what your brain can come up with. And being able to have those little time gainers can be really useful with that. I'm going to just give you one final way of being able to give yourself a little bit more time. And this is going to come in the form of a little video from a gentleman that has become quite well known in the area of negotiation skills. His name is Chris Voss, and he's written a book called Never Split the Difference. Now, this is negotiation skills, but it's negotiation skills from a very particular perspective. I do a lot of training in the area of negotiation skills and use a lot of academic research, but I found Chris Voss is a nice, not alternative, but a nice other side to the research. Chris Voss comes to it from the background of an FBI hostage negotiator. So that is why he says in his attitude of negotiation that you can't split the difference, whereas we might be negotiating about the sale of or purchase of a house, we can maybe split the difference with the price, but when you're negotiating for a hostage's life, splitting the difference is not really an option. You really want the whole hostage back. So Chris has a very proactive approach to negotiation, and he's got one particular technique that he calls mirroring. This is quite different to the type of mirroring that some of us might be familiar with in body language mirroring, which is also a very valid technique in being able to create engagement with others. But this is a mirroring technique that he uses in speaking. So I'll just let you have a listen to Chris Voss for a minute.
The mirroring that I teach is not the same as the way most people think of mirroring. Most people, when they think of mirroring, they think mirroring body language, mirroring tone of voice, even using the same words. It's not that at all. The mirroring that I teach is much more simplistic, and interestingly enough, has a great impact on how the other person interacts with you. And it's just repeating the last 1 to 3 words that they've said, word for word, 1 to 3 words, or it's repeating a selected 1 to 3 words. And what it really does is it helps connect people's thoughts. There will almost never be a time when you've mirrored the last 3 words of what someone said when they want to go on and explain and reword and expand. And that mirror, what it's just done is it helps give you a better understanding of what the other person is trying to say. It also gives you more time to think. It's a way to buy time in a negotiation for yourself. The other person doesn't see you buying time in any way, shape, or form. It's a great way, when you don't know what to say or where to go, to keep them talking in a way that they're very comfortable with. One of my clients actually mirrors his counterpart's positions every single time. Every time they make a statement on a position, he simply mirrors it. They'll repeat it, they'll expand it, and every time he does that, it also gives them a good feel for whether or not they're really stable in that position or whether there's quite a bit of softness in the position, completely based on how they reword and respond to his mirror. So a mirror is a great way to keep somebody else talking very comfortably.
So did everyone understand Chris Voss's mirroring technique? And let me tell you, it works beautifully. I do it over and over again with others. Please don't tell anybody outside of this session that I do that, because it will severely compromise my ability to be able to involve them in a conversation. But it works all the time, and it does two beautiful things. Sorry, Pamela, you had a question?
No, I have a comment. About 25 years ago, I did dispute resolution training with the Queensland Department of Justice, and that's a key technique that I learned in that to help parties appreciate the other person's point of view or experience. And I've just incorporated that into the way I interact with people, and I find it can really help to bring the tension down as well. So not so much about winning a negotiation, but about building agreement, I guess, between, or building understanding between the parties.
And that's and do you find that you can use it over and over again, and people don't feel like it's a technique? It just seems such a natural part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a really wonderful idea. I mean, in my experience, there's a lot of, I think one of the most valuable principles behind this is I discovered a lot of people are terrified about being boring. They need us to be able to say to them, yes, I'm interested. Please tell me more about that. And they need that validation. And simply by mirroring, maybe repeating one or two words that they said with a rising inflection, lets them know, yes, this person seems to be really interested. Because they're interested, I'll tell them more. And I feel certainly in my counseling background, I learned very quickly. I developed the principle that the presenting problem is never the underlying problem. In other words, what they first say to you is very rarely the real issue. It's only after you get a chance to be able to dig a little bit deeper, show them that you're really interested, show them that you care enough to understand, that you will generally be able to get to the significant issue. Would you agree with that, Pamela?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So we're coming up to closing time for this session. I hope I've been able to share something of value. Thank you very much to all of those who contributed into the chat room. And we will be taking the recording of this and, as I said, putting it up onto the Brisbane Sunrise Speakers Toastmasters YouTube channel. It will be there within 24 hours. So if there are any points that you feel that you'd like to be reminded of, you can go back in there and have a look at that recording. Thank you very much for all of those of you who attended. Please remember, you are always welcome to join us at Brisbane Sunrise Speakers Toastmasters, first and third Mondays. The fifth Monday is when we do these special sessions. Our regular meetings, first and third Mondays, 6:20 for 6:30 a.m. At the Communify building in 10 Love Street, Spring Hill in Brisbane, or join us online. Every meeting is hybrid, and that time is Greenwich Mean Time, or UTC, +10. So just readjust that, please, for whatever your local time zone mean. Kurt, we'd love to see you come back again if you can join us at another meeting. So any final comments before we wrap up this session? I'd like to just pass on my thanks to Adrian and June, who have been running the logistics of this meeting behind the scenes, so I could focus on what I was actually delivering.
I think that you've just made a really good point there, Kevin, that you're the front person, but it does take a team. And I think that's something that we learned through our years in Toastmasters as well, that, you know, it takes a team to get a good show on the road.
I think it does. And I'm constantly reminding my trainees that even though you might be standing on the stage or standing in front of a group of people, if you've been able to use your mastermind group, your group of friends, your Toastmaster club to help you prepare this, then you're never standing there by yourself. You're standing there with all of these other support people spiritually behind you, allowing you to be able to deliver with more success. We are never standing up there alone unless we want to put ourselves there alone. Thank you, everyone.